when you make yourself the center, and motherhood is a really great example, when everything you're doing as a mom is fundamentally reflecting back on you, that's actually an incredibly heavy burden to bear.
Yeah.
Because when things are going well, you feel great, but when things are going badly, it reflects very poorly on you. And so that feels insecure because it is insecure. You're not standing on an identity that is stable, but really just depends on your circumstances.
Hey moms, welcome back to the Gather Moms podcast. We are so glad that you are with us today. And we are so happy to tell you that today you not only get Rebecca and I, but you get the incredible Sharon Hodde Miller. She's been a guest with us before, and we are so thankful to have her back. So Sharon, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, ladies. I'm so honored that you asked me to come back on.
Well, I'm so thankful that we're friends because I feel like, I think that we're friends because, or that we found each other when we did, you did a speaking engagement at our church, so we got to have you on the podcast. And for me, you have been the voice of reason, on your Instagram in a world of just chaos, through election and just all the things that we have dealt with. And so I just wanted to say thank you for being a voice of calm and reason in the wilderness.
Yes. That's so encouraging. Thank you for saying that. That means a lot.
I didn't really have this on our questions to ask you about today, but have you felt like, do you feel like you have a particular calling of what your voice is on social and what you're called to kind of lean into and speak about?
Yeah, I think it has shifted over time. I think there was a season when I felt I was putting a lot of energy into trying to change people's minds into like what I thought was biblical faithfulness. And so, engaging people online, posting in a way where I'm trying to move people in a particular direction. And I have really felt over the years the limited effectiveness of that it's not me that changes people, it's the Holy Spirit that changes people. And so instead have really leaned into in the last several years, like, who are the people who are already listening to me, and how can I shepherd them well? How can I speak directly to their sins, their struggles, their discouragements, so that I can encourage them to press on, to endure, to be faithful, but to also, because I think there's a lot of preaching to the choir where you're kind of saying the things that your audience already agrees with. And that only entrenches self-righteousness. That's all that accomplishes. And so making sure, okay, the people who are actually listening to me, what are their blind spots? And usually that means, what are my blind spots? What do I'm feeling convicted about? That sort of a thing. And so I've definitely put a lot more energy behind that in more recent years.
That's great. I love that. So before we jump ahead anymore, for our moms, the two of them that don't know about you, would you tell us a little bit about what you do for work, what your calling is, what your family's like, where you are, some of those kind of things?
So my husband and I lead Bright City Church in Durham, North Carolina. We planted it about almost 7 years ago now. And so we do that. I also am an author. I travel and speak a fair amount. And then I am a mom. And so I have 3 kids. One is about to turn 13. So I am about to become the mom of a teenager for the first time, which is so weird.
Come on in. The water's fine.
You are welcome here.
Yes, the water's fine. It has been my favorite experience, so it's going to be great.
Yeah, I actually, my middle is 10, and then we have one daughter who is 7. And this has been just the sweetest season of parenting. It's definitely been my favorite so far because, the infant toddler stage is is tough. Like it's a very hard stage. Like it has its sweetness to it, but
Yeah.
I am happy to have moved on from that season as well. And I know that the teen years can be a little more emotionally complicated, but right now we're in this sweet spot where our kids still think we're awesome and they still think we're funny and fun and they want to spend time with us, but they're also independent, and so they can, go entertain themselves, or we can leave some of them home alone. And so it's a really great season. Like I thought the idea when they were little of them getting bigger was it just caused me so much grief. But
Sure.
now it's like there's just more of you to hug. Like there's more of you to grab onto and like love. And so I've really enjoyed it a lot.
Good. That's such a beautiful way to look at it. And absolutely. Now, is your oldest a girl or the boy? Because you have one of each, right?
Yeah, well, I have two boys and a girl, and so my oldest two are both boys.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah, I think, I don't know. We both got to do boys first,
Yeah,
going into
middle school
those.
boys are not too bad.
Yeah,
They
it's
smell
been
real
so
bad, but
far, knock on wood, it's been a piece of cake.
the
It's like
drama
no
piece was
drama.
not there for my boys. So we did great, man. We
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
trucked along.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's gonna be awesome. So, Sharon, you have written the last time we had you on, you had just written Cost of Control, and we had such a great conversation about. I've used your language so many times where we talk about that we don't have control, but we have agency,
Right.
and that was just that was something pivotal for me to kind of lock onto of like what has God actually given me agency over. It was just very freeing. So you've also written a book called Free of Me that you just re-released not long ago with a new cover. And, it's interesting when we think about Free of Me and this concept of kind of self-focus. I really do think when we think about motherhood, unfortunately, that's something that moms can be really susceptible to is seeing everything through a lens of ourselves. We kind of act like we're not like we're here to serve everybody else and we're about everybody else, but then we get that like martyr, why isn't everybody thinking me, why isn't anyone thinking about my needs and things like that. Why do you think that moms in particular struggle with that self-focus mentality?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an ironic. I guess it's almost like a paradox because I think for mothers there is this stereotype of the good mother almost being selfless, just giving for their children, laying themselves down for their whole family. And I think we all kind of aspire to be that. Like we want to be remembered that way. And there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. I think the reason why it gets unhealthy is that there's an identity piece at work here where it's not that maybe selfless is actually the right word to describe what is happening. There's like a loss of self where we are finding our identity in this role. Like our value and our meaning comes from this role. Our validation comes from this role. And it's a really similar dynamic, honestly, with pastors where they can look really heroic. They can look selfless, like they're these incredible servants. They're always working. They're the first ones at church, the last one to leave. And it can seem like, oh, aren't you just like Jesus? But it's actually what is driving them is over identifying their value with their job. And so when this role, whether it's as a pastor or as a mother or whatever it is, there's an endless number of ways this can manifest, is you are taking this role and you are actually making it about you, that it reflects back on you in some way. And as long as that is the case, then that's a hunger that can never be filled. Like you're always going to have to keep going to that, to do more, to fulfill this image that you want to put out into the world. And so that's why, even though it can look incredibly selfless, there is an extent to which it can become very much about self. And one of the dead giveaways is whether or not you're healthy. Like if you are exhausted and you feel like you're not having any margin for yourself, like that's a telltale sign that you have actually over identified with this role and that you are doing this because of how it reflects back on you, rather than just doing it in freedom as an act of faithfulness to God.
That's so good. Okay, so I think that makes sense. I think every mom listening is going to identify with the fact that, okay, when I'm feeling burned out, I've put too much of my identity in this calling, and that's part of my calling, but that's not all of who I am. What are there any other telltale signs that a mom can look for that she has gotten the focus on herself?
Mm-hmm. So part of the reason why I re-released Free of Me in July, and then I have my most recent devotional coming out. That just came out, Gazing at God. And part of the reason I released a follow-up was to give people even more practical handles, like how do I actually go on this journey from self-focus to self-forgetfulness. And I get into it in Free of Me, but I wanted to get just even more into like the nitty gritty of it. And one of the things that I name that has been really helpful for me is I language, like me centered language, these scripts that we play over and over again in our minds, where it's why didn't they invite me? Why didn't they affirm me? Why didn't they thank me? What is wrong with me? Why didn't my husband say this to me? Whatever it is. And what's so fascinating about this, and I actually just posted about this on Instagram, is that in studies of people who are struggling with depression, one of the telltale signs that someone is struggling with depression is this me-centered language. And so that is also just a dead giveaway that if you find yourself in these spirals where you're feeling insecure, and that is the script that is running through your brain, to know that, oh, this is actually like what is going on with me. Is this my filter is off? I'm running everything through a filter of self.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Can you, like, when I think about this idea of self forgetfulness and constantly feeling like we're getting almost walked over in our families, is that this other piece of pride where it's not just about I'm finding my role in that, but like I want praise for that because I am the one that's making everything in this house run. So everybody get on board to say thank you. Do you think there's a pride piece as well where it's almost but I did this, but I've done all the laundry, but I've taken care of the schedule, but I've that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that particular dynamic, there's a lot of stuff happening in that dynamic where we feel entitled to praise after we have served. And I think some of that, there's also a lack of boundaries there. Like we're not saying no. And then when people violate boundaries that we never communicated in the first place, we then resent them for it. So that's like a separate conversation.
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons why we don't have boundaries, why we say yes when we shouldn't say yes and end up resenting people for taking advantage of that, is because of the people pleasing. It is because of the image management, where we want people to think of us in a certain way. But if they then take advantage of that, we resent them for it as well. So I think there's a couple different things going on there.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I want to circle back a little bit to, and this is soft think. I'm trying to kind of think this through a little bit, but, I feel like we've seen in our society the good and maybe the dark side of the rise in counseling. So we all have become more mentally healthy aware. We are talking about clinical diagnoses. Thankfully, people are being more honest about I'm feeling depressed or anxious or whatever. But potentially the dark side of that is there has been this increased focus on how am I feeling, my own personal mental health, how that's affecting me, So then we end up cutting off people that, I don't know, violated our boundaries or something. We end up not doing things we don't want to do because they make us feel bad. There's this whole movement where we are in just such a me-centric place. And I really do feel like potentially that's kind of partly why, this whole counseling thing, there's this dark side, and people end up getting stuck in that depressive state because all they can think about is themselves.
Yeah.
What do you feel like it even brings me back to like just thinking about Lucifer falling, you know, and him being so focused on himself and what he deserved and what he earned. What do you hope, and this in your newest book, Gazing at God, like how does that shift on gazing at ourselves to gazing at God? How can that help set us free from all of these things that we're suffering from because of the age we're living in?
Yeah. So for anyone who's not familiar at all with Free of Me, the reason that I first wrote that book was discovering that there are two causes of insecurity, but our culture only ever talks about one. Me doing that just sent balloons up into the air. Did y'all see that?
I saw the balloons. I don't know if we'll make it to the final cut. But
That's awesome.
you know,
Let's celebrate.
we're
those
celebrating
two
two reasons.
Tell us, Sharon.
There's two reasons. So our culture only acknowledges one, which is low self-esteem. And the way I would describe low self-esteem is seeing yourself inaccurately, not seeing yourself the way that God sees you. That is real. It's a source of pain, wounds. Scripture absolutely speaks to that. However, what I discovered and what led to writing Free of Me is that there is a second cause of insecurity, which is self-preoccupation. And when you make yourself the center, and motherhood is a really great example, when everything you're doing as a mom is fundamentally reflecting back on you, that's actually an incredibly heavy burden to bear. Yeah. Because when things are going well, you know, you feel great. But when things are going badly, it reflects very poorly on you. And so that feels insecure because it is insecure. You're not standing on an identity that is stable, but really just depends on your circumstances. And so Free of Me is all about just teasing that out, understanding the ways that this manifests, and then how do we walk ourselves out of it. But the reason why I wrote a follow-up devotion, in addition to what I already mentioned, just giving like the handles for it, is I also realized that part of what I think we need to understand is the reason we struggle with self-focus is not just because of pride. It's not just because of vanity or arrogance, although that absolutely can be it. But very often, the reason we struggle with self-focus is because of pain. And we know this intuitively from our physical bodies. You know, if you break your leg, you are going to give all your attention to that leg. You are going to accommodate that leg. You're going to protect that leg. You're going to prop it up. You're going to walk on crutches. Everything's going to be about this leg until it is whole again. And so that leg is getting all your focus. And emotional pain is similar, that when we're in emotional pain, it's why people who are depressed have that me-centered, it's pointing to pain. That's what's going on. And so I think that's really important to notice, even in conversations around narcissism, that there's a lot of data showing that narcissists, there's shame there. Like that's actually what's going on underneath. And so I wanted to be able to name that is also an important part of this conversation. We need to understand it. We can't heal. We can't focus on God until we understand that that is at work. And in that sense, I think our culture is giving us tools for doing that work and understanding ourselves. Where I think our culture is not equipping us is the purpose of that is far too limited. Like the purpose of that is simply like, you need to get healthy, you need to have self-understanding so you can kind of live your best life. And one of the things I talk about in Free of Me is I unpack the self-esteem movement and why it didn't yield this generation of confident young people that it thought that it would. It's because ultimately the vision for their lives is way too small. We're created for so much more. We're created to love God and love others. And so if that isn't ultimately the purpose of all of this, then that becomes its own unhealth. And so I think it's important to take those tools of therapy, self-understanding, healing, all that is really powerful in the right context and pointed toward the right end, which is ultimately for you to heal, not so you can just, be your best, healthiest self, but to draw on that physical analogy again, like you don't heal to then just lay in the hospital. You heal so that you can walk again. You heal so that you can run. And so we heal for this purpose that is larger than ourselves. And so the purpose of gazing at God, and I really do this in Free of Me as well, is to remind people like your soul should be on this outward trajectory. And not one that just ignores the self. Like you have to be healthy to do this work. But if the end goal is just you self-actualized, that will become its own type of spiritual sickness.
That's so good. Okay, so can we take that and let's think about it in the motherhood space, because I think when you talk about the self-esteem movement and how it didn't give what people were hoping it was going to give, I see actually a parallel problem in the motherhood culture that we live in. So we could potentially be at fault for being part of perpetuating this if we're not careful, because there is this whole idea, everybody's wearing a hat that says motherhood or mama or something, where it becomes this huge part of this is who I am. I am a mom. And it can become your whole identity. For me as a young mom, this was something I really struggled with. But hearing you say, I'm counseling myself as you're talking, because I'm walking through, okay, what was my pain that then put me on that pedestal? Like, why did I do that? And my mother, and I honor her in this because we've spoken about this, and I've since come to really appreciate so many things about my childhood. But my mother was not like the moms of my friends. So my mom she's like more like hippie. She was always kind of more like loosey goosey, and I saw all of my friends' moms serving in the PTA, being at all the games. The kids' lunches had like all these prepackaged with little notes and everything. And that's just not who my mom was. Now, she had wonderful things that I actually, looking back, I'm like, well, that was a great trade-off. I'm really glad I got these things. But as a child, you're seeing things a certain way. So then I move into motherhood, and I guess there was this wound there of what I had grown up with, thinking, wanting another type of mom. So then I end up really sharing, like, overcorrecting and wanting these children that essentially worship me, that think I'm the best mom ever, that, want to be a mom like I was, and then it's what you said. It's this crushing. It became where it was too much for me to manage. It was actually that third kid came along, and I couldn't bear up under the weight of it anymore.
Yeah. 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 One of the things that has been incredibly liberating for me, that like when I wrote Free of Me, I wasn't thinking primarily as a mother, but in the kindness of God, sometimes the lessons that you write, he ends up repurposing for you. And one of the things that I really took from that message, even after Free of Me released, was the reminder that my children already have a perfect parent. And my job is really simple, which is to point to him. And that liberated me so profoundly with my children, because one of the things that my parents did really well, my dad especially, was if they screwed up, like if they sinned against me in some way, my dad did not waste any time in circling back and apologizing to me. And I remember as a kid, being a little girl and my dad coming into my room and, kneeling down and just humbling himself before me as like a little girl and repenting and owning what he did. And that was so healing to me, like more so than my parents just being perfect all the time. And so for me, that shaped me as a parent, because it reminded me I can always apologize. And that doesn't mean like you can just continually sin against your kids as long as you're like apologizing. That's like cheap grace essentially. But it does mean like if you're doing your level best, and you just lost it, you can go and apologize to your children and demonstrate to them like, how do we own our sin? Like, how do we repent? How do we restore our relationships? But to also say to my children, you know who will never do this to you, like who will never disappoint you, who will never let you down is Jesus. And one of the things I say to my kids is Jesus is the one thing I can give you that can never be taken away, because I won't be with them forever, but he will. And so that has been really liberating to me, that I don't have to be, I can do my best, and that is good enough for God. Like if he can take a loaf of fish and some bread and multiply it to feed 5,000, then he can take my meager offering as a mother and make it enough. And that gives him glory, and I don't need that glory. So that's been really, really freeing for me.
So good. I love that.
I think too, like when I look at our culture of moms out there, I think there are some moms that are like really doing a great job. Like they're spiritually growing, they're trying really hard to be intentional at home. And honestly, it just feels like some seasons of motherhood are just overwhelming, whether you're doing great or not. I'm thinking about sending a kid off to college. There's just, like you can't help the crushing weight of packing their room up and finding scholarships and getting them admitted. What would you say to a mom with this, this new devotional, Shifting Our Gaze, even when I'm doing okay, like emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, but I still feel just that crushing weight of I live in a fallen world and I can't quite carry it all on my own? What would you encourage her as far as like, how does she shift her gaze to stare at that part of the Father that she needs in that moment?
Yeah. I would say it is not our responsibility to protect our children from encountering other people's brokenness, and that includes our own. I mean, we can't. That would be an impossible task. They are going to be hurt by us. Like that is the hard truth, is that we are going to wound our children because we are wounded people.
Yeah.
And so the only hope that we have is that we can own it. We can own it when it happens, instead of, because I think when we sin against our children, it is easy in those moments to say, I responded poorly because of you. Like you drove me crazy.
Pretty sure I've said those words before, so yes.
Pretty sure I have too. and even then, like I do think there is a place for saying, guys, like y'all have been yelling at me relentlessly,
sure.
like I am just a person. Like you
For sure.
cannot expect me to endure this and not have a response. Like that doesn't make it okay. But I also need you to understand that I'm not Jesus. I'm not God. I am just a person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I need both of us to recognize what we contributed to this. But it's so easy. Our children are so little, and it is so easy to just blame them because they can't fight back.
Sure.
And I think that's what we have to be really careful about, is in those moments saying, I wouldn't have responded this way if not for you. I think that is the mistake. It's not you sinning against them, you yelling, you losing your temper. Like you are just a person, but you also then need to own the fact that you are a broken person and not Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Which means your response is not infallible. Your
Yeah.
response is going to be imperfect, and to just own that as quickly as you can.
So let's talk about gazing at God, because when I think about gazing at God, I'm in Colorado and I'm on a mountain and there's like a hot cup of coffee, and somehow I've gone both from like a deck with like my Bible to also like a mountaintop experience, and it's like
without losing your breath walking.
Yeah,
up that
and
mountain.
it's just we're just out here gazing at God. And that all sounds really great. But in like my day-to-day life, where like the alarm goes off and the hustle begins and there's kids to get places and laundry to do and jobs to do, and when you think about a mom that's not in her serene place, where she could go away and have intentional gazing at God time, like what does that look like for a mom in the trenches, in the real world? Like, how does she actually gaze at God?
Yeah, it's funny. I went kind of back and forth on the title, because I think the title does sound like that. Like you're going to open it up and it's just going to be this serene meditation on the beauty of God. And there is some of that in there, but I wrote it much more to be an actual journey that you take. And part of the reason, my editor is the one who suggested that title, because she noticed that I use this language over and over again of raising our gaze. And this devotional is much more of a 40-day journey to that place. And so I think one thing that people will be surprised about in a devotional called Gazing at God is how much of it addresses the self. And so I start out, kind of like I said earlier, the first section of it is about noticing the self and just paying attention. What is going on in my interior world? What are the scripts that I run through my head? What are the assumptions that I just default to? What is the pain that is operating underneath the surface? Because we cannot just simply will ourselves to be less self-focused until we address that first. And so that first step is about noticing the self. There is also work done on understanding the self, of validating the good of the self. All of that is important prerequisite work. And then the, I guess, fourth section gets to denying the self. And that's when I also define, like, what do we mean? That it doesn't mean neglecting the self. It doesn't mean the self is bad. In fact, this is founded on the assumption that anything God creates is good. Anything God creates is good. And so we have to start there. But that doesn't mean that everything is about you now. And so what are healthy ways to be free of that self-focus? And what I talk about is the false self is really what we're denying. And then from there, it's moving towards God and others. And so at the end is when we really get to fixing your eyes on Jesus. So all that to say, my hope is that for a mom who's kind of in the trenches, that if you open it up, there are sections that if you're like, I just need to remember the big picture right now, that is in there. But if you're also saying, like, I'm in an insecurity spiral and I need to understand what is going on inside of me, there are days that are about that as well. And so my hope is that it meets you where you are at, but then doesn't leave you there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So you've had a great motherhood journey right now. You're almost to the middle school phase, which honestly, I'd love to talk to you in a year and see what you have.
Well,
to say.
my oldest, he has finished 6th grade, so we're like a year in.
Okay. I want to know, up to this point in motherhood, for our moms listening, what's the biggest like lesson you've learned as a mom that you're like, oh my gosh, if I could turn around to the mom behind me, this is what I would want to say to her about what God has taught me?
Oh my goodness. The biggest lesson I have learned about parenting.
It's a big question, because it's like, you could go very practical, you can go very spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I do like to say to younger moms is that it's just like a lot more fun than you're often told, or especially women who are pregnant. Like lots of times it's kind of like, oh, you're not going to sleep, but you also are just going to laugh so much because kids are hilarious. And so to know that it's probably going to be so much more fun and funny than even you anticipate. For me, I've written a book about control, and that has been a big learning curve for me, of just recognizing how much of my parenting was about trying to control my children, and walking that line of what does it mean to be a diligent parent, a responsible, godly disciple of my children versus trying to control my children. And attached to that has been a really humbling journey around anger. Like I think parenting often highlights your greatest weaknesses. And for me, anger is a big one, where it is easiest for me when I reach that point to just explode on my children. And I, to be fair, like sometimes they were contributing to it.
Girl,
But
we
it's
know.
like, it's so easy to say that to your kids. Like, y'all, just like I said earlier, y'all made me do that. But to go back to my kids and say, yes, I was frustrated. I was understandably frustrated. And also, I should not have responded to you that way. And it's something that, can I say that I've grown in terms of like being able to better control my anger? Honestly, I don't know if I have. I really don't know if I have, but it is something that has kept me going back to God, like over and over and over again. Those struggles that God does not resolve, that we have to continue to wrestle with him on, are also the things that keep us most proximate to him. And so I have for years and years and years had to go to the Lord, like asking him, help me to tame my tongue, help me to process my anger with you instead of with them. And I don't know, I would have to ask my husband if he thinks I've gotten better at it, but I do know I spent a lot of time with God as a result.
Yes, for sure. I think for all of us, there's whatever it is, you come to find though that it's God's grace that he allows that thorn in the flesh to remain, because it is the thing that just keeps you going back to him, So for me, even today, I was noticing that I was feeling anxious, and I have to go back and go, okay, you're the only place I get peace. Help me, and just all the things that he's taught me over and over again. But I don't know this side of heaven if I'll be ever completely free from those feelings. I do see healing and help, like it's getting better, quote unquote. But there are just times, but I really do think it's a beautiful thing to also see that it is one of the things that just keeps you tethered to a God who loves you and is your source of healing in that spot. So thank you, honestly. Thank you for being very real about that.
Yes.
Because I just think we all.
You never yell. You don't look like a yeller.
That's why I always say to Rebecca, because Rebecca talks about that she's a yeller.
Issue,
and I'm like, it's hard for me to imagine,
Girl, I'm good at it. I can yell real good. Okay.
Yeah. Well, my strength is my weakness. Like, I'm very good with words. And so God uses that to, communicate, to preach, to teach people about the Bible, but that is also my weakness.
For sure.
So, yeah, it has definitely kept me going back to him.
That totally makes sense.
Yep.
Well, hey, thank you so much, Sharon. Yes. You are a wealth of wisdom. We cannot wait for moms to get a hold of these books. For our mamas, we're going to have all the links in the show notes, and we're also going to tag Sharon's Instagram because
you need to follow.
She's a good follow.
Yes.
We don't recommend everybody, but we recommend
this is a good one. Yeah.
Sharon Hodde Miller. She is a voice of discernment and calm in the middle of just chaos, and so we're so thankful for you, Sharon. You're incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, friends. It was good to be with you.
All right, moms, we love you. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.